Hello, everybody. I have finally returned after it's been, I don't even know how many days it's been, but I think it's bordering on a month now since my auditioning for Sun O, right parenthesis, right parenthesis, right parenthesis video. Anyways, I have returned and today I am making another video. Now, before I begin, I'm just going to give all of you a warning to the probably two people who will watch this video that I am not in my usual room upstairs in my house where nobody will walk in on me or interrupt me and where you won't hear most of the chaos of the house, still some of it because I live in a really loud house, but not all of it. I am right now in the downstairs of the house, actually, as for whatever reason, my mom has decided that I am mature enough to be left home alone for the weekend. While she, my sister, and my brother go up to visit her boyfriend in Alabama, who, by the way, is actually a pretty nice guy. So if he somehow finds this, you are a decent person. I don't actually hate you. So, for this video, I am recording it downstairs as nobody will interrupt me or judge me for what I am doing. And, oh, excuse me, I have this annoying cough. And on top of that, I completely forgot what I was going to say, but the point is, I am downstairs where all of my family's pets are, and some of them can be very needy and immensely cringe. So now that it actually brings me quite nicely to the point of this video, which is I am doing a tier list on 2000s bands and their level of cringe. So that is what the point of this video is on. Unfortunately, I could not figure out how to get the recording software on my laptop to work properly. Whenever I would use it, it would show ads, which I thought I blocked, and I am not giving up free advertising. If people want their ads on my videos, they're paying for them. So, I am just going to be recording this all from my phone and then uploading that. So, yes, I'll be recording my computer screen with my phone. All right, so you will not be able to see my beautiful face, which I know is the exact reason you all watch it. To see my beautiful face, my drained of color lips, my pale skin, dead eyes, and my gorgeous facial hair all on my neck. I know that's the exact reason you all watch these videos. Alright, my sister's dog is making weird noises, so there is about to be an awkward cut as I pause recording to go figure out what it wants, and then find something to prop my phone up with before I continue the video. Oh, I think this is recording this. Nope, it seems to be right side up. So I walked my sister's dog. It turns out it didn't need to do anything. It just wanted to dig a couple small holes. It wasn't even really digging holes. It was just tearing up what's left of the grass. So like the 5 blades of living grass on our lawn, it tore up. And then it wanted to try and murder our elderly neighbor and his dog. Because that dog is on even more FBI watch lists than I am. And now the dog is in this room doing stuff. So if you hear any weird noises, it's either the dog or it's the 5 billion orphans I have locked up in my garage. I'm not entirely sure which one it is. The orphans could start making noises at any times. I tossed a half-thawed pizza in there to keep them occupied, but I'm not sure how long it'll last 8 billion orphans. Anyways, on to the video. So here are the options for the different cringe levels. We have anti-cringe. This is for bands that have so little cringe that they have negative cringe. So like Radiohead would belong to anti-cringe because they don't have any cringe at all. Next, we have no cringe, which is pretty self explanatory, but for those of you who are not versed in the cringeometer, which is my personal scale for rating cringe, no cringe just means there's no cringe. They're not anti cringe, but they're also not cringe. They're just no cringe. Then we have little bit cringe. Little bit cringe is for groups and bands that are a little bit cringe. That cringe is usually satirical or ironic cringe, though. So, like U2 in the 90s, they would be classified as a little bit cringe, but that would be due to their ironic, satirical take on the overblown 90s, not 90s, overblown 80s rock star that they were playing in the 90s. Next, we have somewhat cringe. Somewhat cringe. Man, that is not looking good in that light. I'm just going to change the color to something that looks a bit better. Somewhat cringe is for groups, bands and groups that are somewhat cringe. This is the first level, the lowest level of proper cringe that we can have on the list. So, somewhat cringe, there's a little bit of cringe, a little bit of corniness. Like, I might put Journey on this list if I was doing a list of 80s bands. Under somewhat cringe, we have cringe. And cringe is for groups that, well, are cringe. This is just basic, regular cringe. And then we have very cringe. Very cringe is for, well, bands that are very cringe. They have lots of cringe. And then the final level is My Sister's Dog. Now, it is named that because, as you have heard from the story I just shared about walking it, it is very cringe. My Sister's Dog, it is the perfect mix of overly needy and, on top of that, aloof, while also not caring about other people's opinions. And here, I'm going to try and word this in a different way. I don't like the way I was wording it previously. My Sister's Dog has main character syndrome. It doesn't care what other people think. It does whatever it wants to. It doesn't know that consequences for its actions exist. And on top of that, it's just immensely cringe in how needy and destructive it can be. And it is the type of dog to just follow you around. Even if there's no point to it, it'll still just follow you around because it wants to. It also likes to hear itself bark. She is a very loud dog. So that's why that's named My Sister's Dog, because her dog is very cringe. Now, for the bands, I have a mix of bands from the 2000s. Now, from my definition of from the 2000s might differ from yours. The way I consider from the 2000s is based on my feelings and opinions. So if I feel a band fits the 2000s well, I consider it a 2000s band. So, like, for example, Muse, they are on this list. Their first album came out in 1999, and they were formed in the 90s. So, technically, they should be considered a 90s band, but I consider them a 2000s band. At the same time, we have, what's a group that is, Slipknot. I know there are some people who consider Slipknot a 2000s band, but I consider them a 90s band. Or another notable absence is Limp Bizkit, who, if they were on here, would be going right down to the My Sister's Dog level cringe. But I consider Limp Bizkit to be 90s, so they're not on here. So that is the list. Now, I am going to have some difficulty as I don't know all of these bands just based on their images, based on the pictures of their band members. So I'm just going to kind of have to guess as to which band is which. I had a list down on my phone back when I thought that the recording studio would work. But then it didn't. It showed ads, and I do not do free advertising. So I'm just going to have to guess. Or I'll have to do an awkward pause to go and check the list and then come right back. Of course, you won't see the pause. It'll be more of a cut for you, but there'll definitely be a pause. So if there is an awkward, just sudden cut in the video, that's because I paused it to go check the band list. So now, with that said, I'm just going to get straight into how I'm going to score them, and then we'll begin. I am scoring them in the most effective, the most, what's the right word? Objective, that's it. The most objective, effective, and proper method of scoring, rating, and tiering different groups and bands to ever exist. My personal opinion. So, if anyone is writing a paper on cringe from 2000s rock bands, feel free to reference this because this will be 100% accurate without any bias at all, as my opinion is always right. Okay, so now I'm going to have to do something. I'm petting my sister's dog's head right now. It seems to be keeping her quiet. And I'm going to have to move my hand over to my mouse. So she's staying quiet. Okay, now, the first band on my list is Seaver. Now, Seaver, there's kind of at least the songs of theirs I've heard are kind of post-grunge. Now, I will admit, I have not listened to the entire discographies of these bands. As a matter of fact, there's only a few I can say that I've even dug into their discography. Most of them I've just heard their hit songs. So while my opinion is still 100% correct, I'm not going to be referencing actual songs or albums. So you're just going to have to kind of trust that I am right. Now, Seaver, they're post-grunge, and being post-grunge automatically makes you somewhat cringe. Just being post-grunge automatically puts you, at the very least, in somewhat cringe, because all post-grunge, with the exception of the Foo Fighters, is somewhat cringe. And let's face it, the Foo Fighters are more hard rock than post-grunge. And they're more alternative rock than they are hard rock. They're a very difficult band to categorize into one genre. Now, Seaver, they've had some cringe songs. At very least, back when I listened to some of their songs, their lyrics could be a bit cringe, and their instrumentals were pretty standard for post-grunge. So for Seaver, I'm going to put them in the cringe section of the list. They are cringe. They're not very cringe. They're not my sister's dog. They're just cringe. Next up, we have 3 Days Grace. 3 Days Grace are kind of a weird mix of emo and hard rock and post-grunge. And, just based off of that, we know they have to go in very cringe. I don't even think I need to say anything else about them. Now, we have Linkin Park. Now, Linkin Park, they are a very difficult band to categorize on this list, solely because a part of cringe is if you are inauthentic or being too authentic. Those are both big parts that make you cringe. And Linkin Park were never both. I believe every single word Chester Bennington sang, or at the very least the meanings behind the metaphors that he would sing. But at the same time, their instrumentation and their just general sound definitely devolved. They went down the sort of stereotypical 2000s pop-punk band route, where they got a lot softer and more poppy as time progressed. And in my opinion, going from an angry, aggressive, and actually good quote-unquote new metal act to a pop group with Chester Bennington singing is cringe. But at the same time, they have Chester Bennington. So, well, they had. Rest in peace, Chester. So, I'm going to put them at somewhat cringe. If it wasn't for Chester, they'd definitely be in very cringe for Selling Out. But with Chester and with their incredible albums back in the early years, they belong in somewhat cringe. Now, next up we have Alter Bridge. Yes, that's Miles Kennedy, Alter Bridge. Now, Alter Bridge, are one of my personal favorite 2000s rock bands. Miles Kennedy has a fantastic voice. Mark Tremonti, his guitar skills were very much underutilized in Creed. I just realized I don't have Creed on this list. Okay, well, here, I'm going to really quickly add Creed. No, not whatever that is. Creed rock band. I am adding Creed onto this list. Where's the... That's not Creed the band. I don't know what that is. I'm talking about the band. Here we go. Creed. I am adding Creed onto this list. Let's see. Creed. Yes. Okay, now if I click on this. Creed. There we go. Creed are now on the list. I can't believe I forgot Creed. How did I remember to put Nickelback and Arctic Monkeys, but not Creed? I guess that makes sense that they're both huge. How did I remember Kings of Leon, but not Creed? Anyways, so Alter Bridge, some of their lyrics, especially later on, become a little bit cringe as Miles Kennedy tries to go in a darker direction. But at the same time, their lyrics also, while their lyrics are a bit cringe, they're very good instrumentalists and very good songwriters. I'm going to... Oh. You know what? No. Little bit cringe. They are a little bit cringe. Okay, next up, we have Nickelback. Now, this Nickelback, they received a lot of hate back in their day because they were Nickelback. And quite frankly, Chad Kroeger isn't exactly the greatest human being to ever exist. At the very least, if the stories I've heard are true, he isn't. Now, of course, the media does make up lots of stuff, so it is possible that what I've read about him is completely false and he's actually the greatest human being of all time. But from what I've read, he's not exactly a great guy, and a lot of their songs are very cringe. But at the same time, How You Remind Me is a fantastic song. Yes, it's very cringe, but I do love it. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. With that being said, one great cringe song is not enough to save them. They're going straight into My Sister's Dog. Now, next up, we have Coldplay. Now, Coldplay, or as I call them, the Chris Martin Band, are one of my least favorite bands of all time. I absolutely hate Coldplay and I hate Chris Martin. They're horrible pop stars who pretend to be rock stars because it's cool and edgy. And on top of that, all of their songs are just really bad. They're going straight into My Sister's Dog. Every time I say My Sister's Dog, she starts wagging her tail. She's just sitting here staring at me with her eyeballs, just like looking into my soul, and it's a bit creepy. Her eyes are also twitching. I think she wants something. She's probably demanding my pet her. Okay, next up we have Fall Out Boy. Fall Out Boy started off as pop punk and emo legends, but then they slowly transitioned to more pop-based stuff, and then they've tried to be, or maybe I'm getting them confused. I haven't listened to Fall Out Boy's entire discography, but all I know is their early years. And their early years are emo, and being emo automatically puts you at cringe. With that being said, though, I do like their brand of emo. But it's still emo, so I'm still going to put them in cringe. Okay. Next up, we have Arcade Fire. Now, Arcade Fire, they are one of my favorite indie rock bands. They are fantastic songwriters, great musicians, great composers, decent lyricists. They've released some of the best indie albums and electronica-based albums of all time. And I'm going to put them in no cringe. They're not anti-cringe, but they're no cringe. They are very good, and if you have not listened to Arcade Fire, you are a poser and a loser, and you need to go listen to them right now. Next up, we have that is Three Doors Down. Now, Three Doors Down are they're post-grunge, and they're kind of an interesting post-grunge, because while I'm not a big fan of most post-grunge outside of How You Remind Me, that one Nickelback song that I like, the Foo Fighters, Three Doors Down are a very weird exception because I like them, but I also grew up listening to them. They were one of the bands my mom played for me when I was a kid, so I do have the nostalgia factor. And on top of that, being post-grunge automatically makes you somewhat cringe. And I think somewhat cringe fit. No, actually, I'm gonna put them cringe. Are they cringer than the Fall Out Boy need to be here? Are they cringer than Seaver? Yes. I'm gonna put them right here in cringe. I still love those guys though. Great band, even if they are cringe. Now we have the Black Keys. The Black Keys are a blues rock duo, and they are a very interesting band. I remember that YouTuber Jared Dines released this video, what bands would sound like based off their image or something like that. And the type of music he played for the Black Keys image was far better than their actual music, which is just pretty standard 2000s blues-based garage rock. But at the same time, maybe it was the Black Crows he was doing. I don't know. There's so many bands that are called the Black something that I forget most of them and get them all mixed up. Actually, I probably need to look up the Black Keys. Hold on. The Black Keys. Let's see. Okay. They are the band I was thinking of. Okay. Yes, I just needed to confirm that they were the band I'm thinking of. The Black Keys, I'm going to put them somewhat cringe, and they are... So yes, they are cringier... No, wait. Yes, they are cringier than, what are those guys? They are cringier than Nickelback. Next up, we have My Chemical Romance. Now, My Chemical Romance are the best emo bands to ever be made, and as a matter of fact, they're so good that they transcend emo. They've released 2 fantastic classic albums in Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge and The Black Parade. I do unironically and ironically love both of those albums. And now, the question is, are they cringe? And the big issue with them being cringe is their lyrics and their image. Even if they have this tendency to create the best choruses of 2000s music, period. As a matter of fact, the best choruses since the early 90s and the grunge movement. Although they have the tendency to do that, their lyrics are still sometimes cringe. Sometimes they're not, but sometimes they are kind of cringe. And their whole image is very much an emo image, which is immensely cringe. And as I mentioned before, being emo automatically makes you cringe. But at the same time, they're My Chemical Romance. So I'm going to put them somewhat cringe. They are cringier than Linkin Park, but they're not quite as cringe as the Black Keys. Next up, we have the White Stripes. The White Stripes are another blues rock, garage rock based band, and they are most famous for Da 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 Da, Seven Nation Army. And personally, the White Stripes, I like the White Stripes. They're not like my favorite 2000s band, but I like them. And Jack White is an inspiration on my guitar playing. His kind of simplified, stripped-back, bluesy approach is something that I bring a little bit of into my own playing. And lyrically, their lyrics are very sort of 90s grunge based. They are very abstract. You know, sometimes some of their songs might not even have meanings at all. Like, I cannot pick out a meaning for the lyrics behind Seven Nation Army. I do just believe that Jack White wrote down decent sounding lyrics that made no sense and then sang them, or maybe he improv'd all the lyrics, I don't know. So yeah, I can't really consider the lyrics like I can for some other bands for the White Stripes. So for the White Stripes, I'm gonna put them as no cringe. I feel they belong in no cringe. Now, next up, I believe this is the Strokes. Now, the Strokes, it took me a while to get into the Strokes, if I'm to be fully honest. The first time I tried to get into them, I hated their singer's voice, Julian something, I believe. I'm not that good with names, to be honest. And I don't exactly go and look up a band unless I'm really fascinated by their history. And I'm not that fascinated in the Strokes' history, and they're just another 2000s indie band that got popular. But then, I think third time I tried to listen to them, I got into their music, and I liked it. They're not my favorite indie band, but I liked it, and I still like it to this day. But at the same time, they can be kind of cringe, especially lyrically, and their songwriting is fairly simple. They're not exactly a technical mastermind, and they're not like Beethoven or Dream Theater composing 40-minute long epic arrangements with 5,000 different tempo and key changes and time signature changes and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, they belong in they belong in somewhat cringe. I'm gonna put them right. I'll put them right here. They're not quite as cringe as the Black Keys, but they are more cringe than My Chemical Romance and Linkin Park. Now, next up, we have The Killers. The Killers released arguably the best album in the sort of early 2000s distorted garage rock, indie rock scene, and Hot Fuss, or Hot Fuzz, or I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it. I'll just call it Hot Fuzz for now. They released that album, which, quite frankly, I love that entire album. There are some people who don't like the whole album and just like the big hits. Personally, I love the whole album. But then, that first album is really the only completely good from start to finish album they had. Their second album is kind of a watered-down version of the first. And their third album, they tried to become a synth dance band. And then after that, they tried to become Bruce Springsteen, which does not suit them nearly as much as their first album. And then on top of that, their lyrics, I'm just gonna say it, as much as I love their first album, lyrically, they are not good. They had one incredibly well-written lyrically song in Mr. Brightside, which is also their best song and their biggest hit. And that's about it. The rest of their songs lyrically range from meh to, well, even cringer than My Sister's Dog level of cringe. Like, what was that one lyric from Human? Are we human or are we dancer? What does that even mean? That's just so cringe. So, yes, they belong in cringe. They're cringer than Seaver, cringer than Three Doors Down, cringer than even Fall Out Boy. They are at the top of cringe. Now, next up, we have System of a Down. Now, System of a Down are, in my opinion, the best of the 2000s nu metal bands. And now, nu metal is a very wrongly, incorrectly used term. Most people use nu metal to refer to pretty much all types of metal from the 2000s, from the 90s and 2000s. You know, Slipknot, Korn, and System of a Down would be lumped into the same group as Limp Bizkit. Personally, I see nu metal as more of Slipknot and Korn, Linkin Park and System of a Down, and then rap metal is Limp Bizkit and all of the other immensely cringe and horrible new metal stuff. Now, System of a Down, as instrumentalists, they're pretty good. As vocalists, Serge is arguably the most technically proficient vocalist. Honestly, maybe since Ronnie James Dio and Freddie Mercury. He is a fantastic vocalist when it comes to technicality. And on top of that, they're just a really good band. But at the same time, their lyrics can be a little bit cringe, but I believe it's an ironic cringe. So I'm going to put them as little bit cringe, and they're going to be under Alter Bridge. They're not quite as cringe as Alter Bridge. Now next up, we have Muse. Muse's first 3 albums are the only 3 that all of their fans consistently love. And then a good portion love their 4th album, and then a somewhat smaller portion love their 5th. And then after that, everyone just starts hating each album more and more and more. And then their latest album is pretty much despised by their entire fan base, from what I understand. At the very least, that's what the, what's it called, Rate Your Music or Rate My Music, whichever one it is, website says. Now, personally, I love Muse's first 5 albums. They're all really good. And all of their albums, even up to their latest one, have at least one really good track on them, one really good song. The problem is the overall quality. Their first 3 albums, actually I'd say their first 4 albums are definitely a complete listen. You can listen to every song on the album and enjoy them. Their 5th album is a little less so, but it's still great. And their 6th album, it's a bit worse, and a bit worse on until we get to their latest album. And now the biggest part of a band becoming cringe is if they start to become parodies of themselves. If you become a parody of yourself, you automatically become cringe. And unfortunately, with their latest album, Muse have pretty much become parodies of themselves. They are like what SNL would write up to make fun of them in a skit. That's what they've become, an SNL version of Muse. But at the same time, they released 4 near perfect albums, and then a 5th one that's fantastic. But they still released all of the material after that. I mean, their whole 80s synthwave album where they were trying to capitalize on the popularity of Stranger Things back in 2018. That album was actually, in my opinion, their cringiest album. Yes, they love, or at least I believe they love the 80s based on how much they like to use synths. But just because you like to use synths doesn't mean you can make good 80s pop music. For that, I don't know where to put them. They released some of the best music, but also some of the worst. If we were just judging based on only their discography from the 2000s, they'd go in a little bit cringe, maybe even no cringe. But I have to include their later discography as well, which they're cringe. They're right under the Killers for cringe. They're and cringe. Now next up we have Evanescence. My mom is a much bigger Evanescence fan than I am. She listens to a lot of their stuff. I listen to a couple of their big hits, and Amy Lee has a great voice. I love her voice, but I don't listen to Evanescence that much. I'm more of a 80s underground and 90s alt-rock guy, so... And Evanescence, they kind of, I don't know, I mean, it's not really anything against the band, they're just not a group that I vibe with, if that makes any sense. They're good, and I have a ton of respect for them, especially Amy Lee and her fantastic voice, but I just don't really vibe with them. And now, in terms of cringe, on the one hand, they have this pretty cringy, sort of emo-y, gothic aesthetic to them. But at the same time, at the very least, based on their big songs, I kind of get the feeling that Amy Lee is authentically like that way. I'm not sure about the other band members. And as I mentioned, if you are the right amount of authenticity, if you genuinely mean what you are doing and you're not being either a parody of yourself or pretending to be something you're not, that automatically decreases your cringe some. But at the same, so I don't know. And then, as I've mentioned, I've only really listened to their big hits. Based on their big hits, ooh, where do I want to? I'm gonna put them at the top of, actually no, at the bottom of somewhat cringe, just above Linkin Park. Now, next up, we have Queens of the Stone Age. Now, Queens of the Stone Age are I believe they're sort of sludge rock or stoner rock. Some people also refer to them as desert rock. At the very least, their Wikipedia page does. Personally, I just see them as just sort of not hard, but just sort of alternative rock. They're kind of like a heavier, they're kind of like a sort of in between the Foo Fighters and then full on Nirvana. They're heavier than the Foo Fighters, but they're not quite as heavy as Nirvana. That's kind of where I put them. They're just an alternative rock band. That's what I convinced them. Although stoner rock does fit their sound pretty well as well. And they're actually a pretty decent band. I quite enjoy their. I haven't listened to all of their albums, but I've listened to some of their albums all the way through, and they are a pretty good band actually. So, based on the albums I've listened to, I'm gonna put them a little bit cringe below. Actually, no, I'm gonna put System of a Down below them. And should I put Alter Bridge? But no, Alter Bridge are cringer than them. I'm gonna put them right there. That's a good spot for them. Now, next up, we have Avenged Sevenfold. Now, Avenged Sevenfold released one horrible album, and then every album they've released since their debut has actually been very good. I know their recent album, Life is But a Dream, has somewhat mixed reviews. People either love it or hate it. Personally, I love it. I love the sort of avant-garde proggy approach they use. But I know some people absolutely despise the album and consider it their worst ever. Personally, as I've mentioned before, I really like it, and in my opinion, their only properly horrible, bad, cringy album is their debut. Their second album stays with the metalcore sound of the first before moving to the more hard rock based sound, heavy metal based sound that they would adapt in their later albums, and then the proggy sound they would adapt in their even later albums. So they released one immensely cringe album, and then their second album, which is still metalcore, is somewhat cringe because it's metalcore. Being metalcore automatically makes them somewhat cringe. But at the same time, they made guitar shredding cool again, and they had Jimmy the Rev Sullivan drumming for them. And that man, he was not human. Rest in peace, the Rev. You are an absolute legend. Just so, I can't put them in no cringe because of their first album, but I can put them in little bit cringe. Actually, I'm gonna put them at the bottom of little bit cringe. If it wasn't for their first album, I'd be able to put them in no cringe. Now, next up, we have Arctic Monkeys. Now, the Arctic Monkeys are another sort of indie rock band, sort of under the more distorted side of indie rock. And quite frankly, I like the Arctic Monkeys' first two albums a lot. I like their first two albums are pretty good. And then, I don't know if they have a third album they released between that, their first two, and then their big album where they had like Are You Mine and a couple other songs like that. That's the only one I remember from that album. I only kind of half-hearted listened to their big one, AM, a couple days ago. Actually, yesterday I listened to it, but it was only kind of half-heartedly as background music, just sort of passively giving me something to vibe to as I did other stuff. And now, lyrically, I've heard some people refer to their lyrics as fantastic. What's the name of their? I don't remember the name of their lead singer and lyricist, but I read an article somewhere that said he's the modern day equivalent of Jim Morrison. Quite frankly, I am a huge Doors fan, and I don't believe he's the modern day equivalent of Jim Morrison. A part of Jim Morrison's charm was he was able to write poetic lyrics that were also pretty straightforward. You'd listen to a Doors song, and then most of his lyrics were, just "I love you," different variations of that, but he managed to make them all sound unique, which is part of his charm. He could break out the abstractness, don't get me wrong, especially on the end. I don't think even he knew what the meaning of the end was. The lead lyricist and singer of Arctic Monkeys doesn't quite have that. Most of the time, their lyrics just make absolutely no sense at all. And at the end of the day, they're also the Arctic Monkeys, so I'm gonna put them somewhat cringe, right above My Chemical Romance. They're below. Who's that? The Strokes. Arctic Monkeys and the Strokes being together actually is about right. They're both about equal levels of cringe. Next up, we have Def Cab for Cutie. I've only heard some of their big hits. I'm sure I've heard them on the radio when I'm driving sometimes, but I've only actively listened to a couple of their big hits, which were fine. As a matter of fact, the cringe levels, they actually probably should go right here as well with the other two based on their big hits. Matter of fact, I'm going to put them above the Strokes and Arctic Monkeys. Well, next up, we have Kings of Leon. I have never listened to a Kings of Leon song. The only Kings of Leon song I know is what's it called? Sex is on Fire, I believe the name is, which is just a stupid name. And that song, I always think the melody is something like, what's that song my sister really likes? There's some song that goes, "This girl is on fire." I always imagine that is the melody to the Sex is on Fire song. "This sex is on fire." I always imagine that's kind of the melody. That's the only thing I can think of for their music. But based entirely on that name, they're even cringer than Dree Days Grace. They're not quite My Sister's Dog, but they're very cringe. Next up, we have Breaking Benjamin, who are kind of a gothic, emo-y take on Alter Bridge style hard rock. Personally, I kind of like their music. Some people hate it. I like it. I'm not a huge fan. I'm not going to go and actively listen to their entire discography. I might put, they're one of the bands who, if it comes on the radio or on a mix I'm listening to or something, I'll listen to it. I won't skip their songs, but at the same time, I'm probably not going to go and listen to their entire discography. And then when it comes to cringe, on the one hand, they kind of have this gothic aesthetic to them, and I do kind of get the feeling that they're kind of posers, to be honest. I haven't done any research about their history. There could be a reason, but I kind of get the feeling it's kind of fake, that they're just kind of playing a role. So I think they belong in cringe. I'm gonna put them above Seaver, below Three Doors Down, but above Seaver right there. Next up, I believe this is Interpol. Now, I quite frankly really like Interpol. I like post-punk music a lot, and I like Interpol. And I don't think Interpol are that cringe. Actually, I'm gonna put them in no cringe. Yes, no cringe. The cringiest of no cringe. The White Stripes be above Arcade Fire. They're the cringiest and no cringe. Next up, we have Disturbed. Now, personally, I wanted to put Disturbed in with the 90s bands. They formed like 92 or something. And I was going to, but then I read their first album was released in 2000. So since they didn't have releases in both the 90s and 2000s, I couldn't kind of pick which era I felt they belonged to better, like I did with some of these groups. So I had to lump them in the 2000s. And I've only listened to like 3 of their songs. A cover of Wait, did they do a cover of Land of Confusion by Genesis? They might have. If they did, I've listened to that. I've listened to their cover of Sound of Silence. And then I've listened to, what's it called? Down with the Sickness, I believe it's called. These are really the only songs of theirs I've listened to. And of those 3, one of them might not be real, I'm not entirely sure, in the Land of Confusion cover. And then the other one is a cover, which was actually, I hate to say it, but it was kind of cringe that David Drainman used auto-tune on his voice. You can hear it if you listen to it. And as good of a cover as it is, it does kind of lose the sort of simplistic underlying deepness of the original that came and how soft it was. So the original one kind of brought out the feelings of darkness and of just emptiness that it was trying to, and how soft it was. This one, it doesn't. It loses that. Now, those are the only things I have to go off of, and based off of those, I'm gonna put them at the bottom of very cringe. Next up, we have Audio Slave. They have Chris Cornell, so they go in anti-cringe. Anything with Chris Cornell is automatically anti-cringe, and I'm not biased. That is just the laws. Chris Cornell is amazing. Next up, we have Paramore. Now, personally, I like Paramore's early materials, their early emo-y pop-punk sound. I like that. I also prefer that aesthetic to them, although it probably is a thing because I like red hair. I will admit that. And Hayley Williams had some of the best red, orange dyed hair back in the her emo period. And I don't really like their newer material either. It's just meh. But at the same time, they were emo, so they have to be at the very least somewhat cringe. But their emo messages were kind of different than most of the others. Instead of "I'm depressed," it was more of "I'm upset that people are treating other people incorrectly," or something like that. It's been a good amount of time since I've listened to their discography. I'm going to put them cringier than Linkin Park, but near the bottom of somewhat cringe. Now, next up, we have Panic at the Disco. I really like Panic at the Disco's first album, even if it was very much emo-y. It was very good. It had some very good hooks, very good album overall. And then after that album, they just became worse every album. Then they became a pop band. So if it was based off of their first album alone, I would put them at the near sort of around here of somewhat cringe. But because I have to include their newer stuff, they're going. They're going. Yes, they're actually going to go at the top of cringe. They're more cringe than the Killers. Finally, we have Creed. Creed are going at the top of My Sister's Dog. Okay, I don't even need to explain that one. Okay, so this was a pretty long video. It's going to be like 50-something minutes. So it should be enough to keep you all entertained for another month until I decide to make another video. I do have a couple of ideas in the works that I'm going to be recording and releasing eventually. Of course, I don't know when. I'm a procrastinator. Like I promised I'd release this video this weekend, and as you can probably see on the time, it's 9:53. So technically the weekend is still here, but it's nearly done. But yes, I have a couple more videos I'm going to release. Well, not release, but record and then release. I don't know when I'll get to that, but I will eventually at some point. So if you watch this, thank you for watching, although I highly doubt anyone's going to sit through this entire video as it is very long. And if you do, I applaud you. You have done well. And to prove you watched the entire video, I want you to type hashtag Nickelback and Creed are my sister's dog in the comments so I can know that you did that. Okay? Consider that a challenge. Now, as usual, please do not subscribe unless you really like watching me being stupid and angering the entirety of the internet. And I will see you in, not actually see you, but you will hear my voice at the very least in a month or two. So goodbye.